Kamala Harris. How do Democrats feel about her getting the endorsement from Joe Biden? Does she really have commensurate support enough to win the nomination and maybe perhaps even the election?
I think that it's going to be a difficult race, but in a lot of respects, there are structural advantages for Kamala Harris being the presidential candidate. One thing that is going to be a big difference for her versus a different Democratic presidential nominee is that she'll actually have access to far more of the funds that was raised under the Biden-Harris campaign already, and that's a few $100 million, right? Because she's already on the ticket. If there was a different Democratic presidential candidate instead of Biden or Harris, it would be a lot more difficult for them to transfer that money either to the Democratic National Committee and then to the campaign or through other convoluted means. And so just from a resource and structural perspective, Kamala Harris is going to be much more positioned. Now, when it comes to who she is as a candidate, I think that that's going to be the big question, because when she was running for president herself, she struggled to figure out what is her message, what is her lane, and that probably cost her her candidacy. She was seen as incredibly promising in the beginning of the race when she declared. But when she dropped out before any of the primary votes had been cast, I think a large part of that was that lack of clarity from Democratic voters across the country for what she was and how she was different on a policy perspective. And that's going to be her opportunity, but also her challenge over the coming months.
I'm curious because with President Joe Biden stepping aside, will this affect Donald Trump's campaign strategy? Because experts say that his campaign has always been targeted or designed to go against President Biden, using his age, his mental state. But if Kamala Harris is indeed their nominee, the Democratic nominee, will this complicate things for Donald Trump?
I think that'll complicate things to a point because Donald Trump is an incredibly, he's a blunt instrument when it comes to politics, right? And so I think that when it comes to pivoting to a candidate like Kamala Harris, who carries with her a lot of different identity factors, right? She's a woman of color, she's the first Black woman and the first South Asian or Indian American vice president ever in the United States. And there's different qualities and different valences that happen when you're talking in a public setting about people from different identities. And so there's a lot of possibility of Donald Trump saying incredibly problematic, maybe even racist and sexist things when he's trying to use his typical bull in a china shop aggressive approach. And so I can see that being one area where he's never shown an ability to be subtle or effective. And so I would not be surprised to see Donald Trump embarrass himself in a lot of respects. But on the flip side, he doesn't show that much embarrassment, right? And so you can see a potential dirtying of the campaign as it gets closer to the ensuing months, as he has a candidate who is more energetic, who is going to be able to really be trying to advance and shape her narrative and her message over the coming months. I'm unfortunately very confident that Donald Trump is going to be not turning down the temperature, but probably raising it in terms of vitriol. And his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, is well known for that as well and will likely be added to that fire.
Let's talk options, though, Gretchen. I just want to hear your thoughts, because a lot of people are asking, if not the vice president, if it's not Kamala, who would it be? A lot of pundits are saying that the Democratic bench ain't that deep, and therefore, there's not a lot of options out there. What would you have to say to that? Would there be another option, if not the current vice president?
I think it's going to be a really interesting question, right? Of where are they going to invest in this role? Is the point of the vice president to expand the electorate, in which case you probably are going to want to pick somebody who is representing a certain state or a certain demographic that might strengthen a weak area for the Democrats. And so if that's the case, someone like Gavin Newsom has been talked about a lot. He's the governor in California. He's my governor because I live in Los Angeles. And so Gavin Newsom is someone who's been talked about a lot. If you're trying to expand the electorate and trying to reach a state or a region that you're not already covered, Kamala Harris being from California, probably not the best pick to add to Gavin Newsom, right? On the flip side, you've heard people talk about someone like Pete Buttigieg, who's the current Secretary of Transportation. And he's someone who had a national profile as a presidential candidate and fared fairly well. And so there's considerations with candidates like him. I think that in a lot of respects, that will come down to a combination of who makes it more possible for the Democratic Party to win in November not just Kamala Harris as president, but also up and down the ballot. And in addition to that, I think a big question will be who shores up the weaknesses that a candidate Harris might have to be able to handle and challenge the back and forth that's going to happen with the Republican Party over the next few months. I think it's an open question, and it'll be really interesting. This might be maybe the most exciting Democratic National Convention in my lifetime for sure, because we're entering it with a much more ambiguity than we've ever had in recent memory.
I did read that on Time today that the Democratic Party is entering uncharted territory with what's happening. It is 4 months only to go before the polls. What will the Harris campaign or the Democratic campaign need to do to catch up with Donald Trump?
I think one of the biggest things is to get out in front of voters. You know, for various reasons, the Joe Biden campaign had been very hesitant to put President Biden in situations where it would be incredibly dynamic and potentially risky. We know and we've seen that he's not the most effective speaker at this moment in his career, especially in these improvisational and unpredictable situations. And the debate showed that, right? That he's not as equipped in this moment to be able to do that well. They're going to need to have Kamala Harris out in front of voters in a lot of different settings, on television, for crisscrossing state to state, because they're going to need to really get that shoe leather, right? Get present, get visible to voters. And I think as they do that, it's really going to be about finding an effective message and having message discipline, right? 4 months could in some ways be a gift because it means that there's not the entire multi-year process of a campaign to go through the narratives, counter narratives, and then constant iteration and reiteration that comes with a long campaign. Over the next 4 months, this is a sprint. And so the most powerful, most meaningful messages are going to win. And so if Kamala Harris can emphasize the kitchen table issues that affect day-to-day Americans and working class Americans, particularly in this moment when folks are, in a lot of respects, not feeling the economic recovery, right, or feeling inflation, or feeling high costs, or feeling exorbitant rent, people are not seeing a GDP increase. We're not seeing that as a day-to-day person, right? And so I think that if she can find a way to reach working class voters, reinvigorate voters, do so where voters are, and pour that energy over the next 4 months, that's the best pathway forward to really be effective and to make sure that she's doing so in a way that feels distinctly her, right? Authentic. I think that's an area where voters are incredibly excited to have candidates that are authentic and have not had that for a very long time in many of our races up and down the ballot, right? And so I think it's this opportunity to really rebrand herself, and she's got 4 months to rebrand successfully or not. We're going to see the fruits or pain of that very, very soon.